Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The world for Audra had not so much shattered as it had simply ceased to exist, its colors, sounds, and sensations blotted out in an instant by the sterile, humming fluorescence of the interrogation room. One moment she had been ensconced in the sleek, modern comfort of her office, the skyline of Genoa city a glittering testament to her hard-won power, her fingers poised over a keyboard, wrestling with a merger or a hostile takeover, a problem that existed in the realm of spreadsheets and legal jargon, a problem with a solution. The next, the universe had constricted to this. The chill of the metal chair seeping through the thin fabric of her designer dress, the faint acrid smell of industrial cleaner failing to mask the underlying scent of sweat and despair, and the unblinking gaze of two detectives who saw her not as Audra Charles, media executive, but as a collection of motives and opportunities, a puzzle to be broken apart. They had been waiting for her in the lobby of the Grand Phoenix, their approach so quiet and deliberate it was more terrifying than any overt show of force. "Audra Charles?" the female detective had asked, her voice a flat, professional monotone. "We need you to come with us for questioning regarding the death of Noah Newman." The use of the formal death instead of murder did nothing to soften the blow. It was a legal formality, a piece of linguistic gauze over a gaping wound. There had been no handcuffs, not then, a small mercy that only heightened the surreal horror of it all. She was a businesswoman, not a criminal. She dealt in boardroom coups, not this. Yet here she sat, the weight of the accusation pressing down on her, making the very air feel thick and difficult to breathe. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument usually capable of calculating risk and navigating corporate intrigue with cold precision, was now a frantic, scrabbling thing, ricocheting between sheer panic and a desperate, clawing attempt to find purchase in this new, terrifying reality. Noah Newman. The name echoed in the hollow chamber of her skull. His face, handsome and often troubled, swam in her vision. Their relationship, a complex tapestry woven with threads of genuine affection, strategic alliance and simmering unresolved tension, now felt like a crime scene itself. Every intimate conversation, every heated argument, every tender moment potentially reinterpreted as evidence. She remembered their last meeting, the sharp edge in his voice, the way his eyes had narrowed when she challenged him on the Newman media strategy. It had been a professional disagreement, the kind she had a dozen times a week, but now filtered through the lens of his violent death. It felt sinister, a prelude to something monstrous. Had someone been listening? Had someone taken a fragment of a truth and twisted it into a weapon? Or was this about something else entirely? A secret she thought was buried? A connection she had failed to see? The questions came in a relentless, dizzying torrent, and she had no answers, only a cold, creeping certainty that she had been meticulously, deliberately set up. The detectives, a study in contrasting yet complementary styles, began their slow, methodical dissection of her life. The man, Detective Miller, was all quiet intensity, his questions soft-spoken but layered with implication, his eyes missing nothing, the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for the cup of water they'd provided, the unconscious way she wrapped her arms around herself, a self-soothing gesture she instantly regretted. His partner, Detective Evans, was the blade to his velvet glove, her voice sharper, her questions designed to provoke and disorient. "You and Mr. Newman were quite close, isn't that right, Miss Charles?" Evans began, not even looking up from her file. "And by close, we mean intimately involved on and off for several months." It was a statement, not a question, laying a foundation Audra knew was perilous. She answered carefully, confirming the basic facts but framing them within the context of a modern, complicated relationship between two consenting adults, trying to drain the situation of any melodrama that could be used against her. But they were already moving, shifting the ground beneath her feet. "And would you say that relationship was stable?" Miller asked, his head tilted in feigned curiosity. "Or were there financial entanglements? Professional rivalries? We understand you were both vying for a significant amount of influence within the merged media divisions." This was the heart of it, the arena where Audra was most comfortable. But here in this context, her business acumen was being reframed as avarice, her ambition as a lethal weapon. She explained, her voice steadier now, drawing on the familiar language of corporate strategy, about healthy competition, about how she and Noah pushed each other, how their disagreements were part of the creative process. But Evans was ready. Push each other? She repeated, a faint, cynical smile playing on her lips. Is that what you call the argument you had at the Genoa City Athletic Club 3 days before his body was found? Witnesses described it as heated. One said you were visibly furious. You told him, and I quote from a sworn statement, "You will regret crossing me, Noah. This isn't over." Audra felt the blood drain from her face. She had said that. She remembered the white-hot flash of anger, the sting of what she perceived as his betrayal on a minor point of a deal. It was a throwaway line, the kind of dramatic threat people in their world uttered daily, a piece of rhetorical flair. But now in this sterile room with a dead man as the subject, it sounded like a direct threat, a promise of vengeance. She tried to explain the context, the high-stakes environment, the fact that everyone in their circle talked like that, but her explanations sounded weak, hollow even to her own ears. She was a woman who traded in words, and now her own words were being used to build a cage around her. The interrogation wore on, a slow, grinding process designed to exhaust and confuse. They circled back to the same points, phrasing the same questions differently, looking for inconsistencies, for the tiny crack in her composure through which they could pour their doubt. They asked about her whereabouts on the night Noah disappeared, and she provided her alibi, which consisted of a long, solitary evening in her apartment, reviewing contracts. There were no witnesses, no time-stamped receipts that couldn't be explained away. She had been alone, a fact that had never felt so incriminating. They pressed her on her past, a territory littered with landmines. They brought up her history with Kyle Abbott, the tangled web of relationships that seemed to perpetually surround her. "You have a pattern, Miss Charles," Evans stated coolly, "of forming intense and often volatile connections with powerful men. It seems these connections frequently end in turmoil." The implication was clear. She was a femme fatale, a manipulator whose personal entanglements had a habit of curdling into disaster. They were constructing a narrative, and she was the central villainous character. The scorned, ambitious woman who couldn't handle rejection or rivalry, whose professional drive had curdled into something far darker. Then came the moment the entire interrogation had been building towards, the piece of evidence they had been holding back, the hammer blow they had saved to shatter her defenses. Detective Miller slid a single, grainy photograph across the table. It was a still from a security camera, time-stamped the night Noah vanished. It showed her, Audra, standing near the entrance of the derelict warehouse where Noah's body was eventually discovered. She was wearing the same cream-colored coat she'd had on earlier that day. Her heart stopped. She could feel the frantic beat of it against her ribs, a trapped bird desperate for escape. How? Why? Her mind raced, trying to access the memory of that night. She had been there. She had driven past the area after a frustrating dinner with a client, needing the quiet of the industrial district to clear her head. She remembered seeing the warehouse, its broken windows like sightless eyes, and feeling a shiver of unease. She had even gotten out of her car for a moment, just to stand in the cool night air, her phone to her ear, trying to reach Noah after their earlier fight. He hadn't answered. The call had gone straight to voicemail. She had stood there for no more than 2 minutes before getting back in her car and driving home. A 2-minute window, a random, meaningless moment, now captured and presented as the cornerstone of a murder case. Her explanation tumbled out, rushed and panicked. She described the phone call, the need for air, the sheer stupid coincidence of her location. The detectives listened, their expressions impassive, a wall of professional skepticism. "You expect us to believe," Evans said, her voice dripping with disbelief, "that you just happened to stop for a moment of reflection at the very location, at the approximate time, where the man you'd recently threatened would later be found dead. A location you have no other logical reason to be near." Sounded absurd. It sounded like a lie, the kind of flimsy, convenient story a guilty person would concoct. The foundation of her world, built on control and perception, crumbled completely in that moment. She was no longer a CEO wrongly accused. She was a suspect caught in a web of damning circumstance, and the more she struggled to explain, the more entangled she became. The realization was a physical coldness spreading from her core. Someone knew she had been there. Someone had known her movements, her state of mind, and had used them, weaving a thread of her own life into the fabric of a murder, making her the perfect patsy. The final act was the arrest itself. The formal words were spoken. Audra Charles, you are under arrest for the investigation of the murder of Noah Newman. The rest was a blur, the words right to remain silent echoing as if from the end of a long tunnel. The cold, hard click of the handcuffs around her wrists was a sensation so alien, so violently opposed to her identity, that it triggered a kind of mental shutdown. This was not happening. This was a nightmare from which she would surely wake. She was processed, her personal effects, her diamond earrings, her watch, the contents of her purse bagged and tagged, each item a piece of her identity being stripped away. She was placed in a holding cell, the door closing with a heavy metallic clang that resonated with a terrible finality. The cell was small, unbearably so, smelling of disinfectant and human misery. She sat on the hard, narrow bunk, her body numb, her mind a whirling vortex of fear and fury. She thought of the people who would soon know Kyle, Diane, Jack Abbott at Jabot, Victoria Newman. She imagined the headlines, the gossip, the triumphant smirks of her enemies. Her career, her reputation, the life she had fought so brutally to build. It was all evaporating before her eyes, poisoned by this single horrific accusation. In the profound silence of the cell, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the precinct, a new emotion began to burn through the shock and despair. A cold, sharp, clarifying rage. This was not a random twist of fate. This was a calculated move. She had been targeted. Someone had murdered Noah Newman, and that same someone had then taken deliberate, meticulous steps to ensure the blame fell squarely on her. The question was no longer how do I prove my innocence, but who did this to me? The list of potential enemies was long. In the cutthroat world of Genoa city power plays, she had made many. But who hated her enough or feared Noah enough to orchestrate something this brutal, this final? Was it a business rival seeking to take out two players with one stone? Was it someone from Noah's own tumultuous past, using Audra as the perfect scapegoat? Or was it something more personal? A ghost from her own past she had foolishly believed was long buried? As the initial paralysis of terror began to recede, the fighter in her, the survivor who had clawed her way up from nothing, began to reawaken. They had picked the wrong woman to frame. They had underestimated her. They had thrown her into the darkest pit imaginable, but in doing so they had given her nothing left to lose. And a cornered Audra, stripped of her power and her freedom, was at her most dangerous. The investigation was just beginning, but for Audra, a different kind of hunt was now underway. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning in Genoa City, but as dawn broke over the Abbott mansion and the streets slowly came alive, whispers of something shocking began to spread like wildfire. The air seemed unusually heavy, almost electric, as if the universe itself was bracing for something monumental. News travels fast in this town, and when the police cars were seen pulling up outside the Grand Phoenix, it didn't take long for everyone to start speculating. Inside, Audra Charles was sipping her coffee, reviewing a new media contract on her tablet, blissfully unaware that her world was about to crumble in an instant. When she looked up and saw Detective Chance Chancellor walking through the doors with two uniformed officers, her confident smile faltered just a little. It was rare for her to be rattled, but something about the look in Chance's eyes told her that this wasn't a casual visit. The lobby fell silent as Chance approached her. Audra, always composed and calculating, set her tablet down and crossed her legs, pretending to exude calm. "Detective Chancellor," she said coolly, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" But the tone of his voice when he replied was anything but pleasant. "Audra Charles," he began, pulling out a folded paper from his jacket, "you're under arrest for questioning in connection with the death of Noah Newman." The sound of the words hit her like a thunderclap. For a split second she froze, her sharp mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. "Excuse me," she stammered, standing abruptly. "What did you just say?" Around them guests and staff stared, whispering in shock. Chance nodded to one of the officers, who stepped forward with handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, and Audra's hands trembled involuntarily as the cold metal clicked around her wrists. "Noah's death?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, as though saying it out loud would somehow make it less real. "That's ridiculous. He's not, he can't be." But before she could finish, Chance cut her off. "Noah Newman's body was found early this morning near the riverbank, and we have reason to believe foul play was involved. You're a person of interest. Gasps echoed through the lobby. Someone dropped a coffee cup that shattered against the marble floor. As the officers led Audra through the crowd, she caught glimpses of familiar faces. Business associates, rivals, even a few old friends. All staring at her with a mix of horror and curiosity. For the first time in a long while, Audra didn't have a witty comeback. Her mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and fear. By the time she was placed in the back of the squad car, her pulse was pounding so loudly that she could barely hear anything else. Noah Newman dead? That couldn't be possible. The last time she'd seen him, they'd had one of their usual tense conversations about their past, about the mistakes and the unfinished feelings that always seemed to hang between them. Yes, things had ended badly between them, but murder? That was insane. She tried to replay their last encounter in her mind, searching for anything that might have been misinterpreted. But before she could make sense of it, the car was already speeding toward the police station. Word spread quickly through Genoa City. Within hours, the news had reached Newman Enterprises, where Victoria and Nick were already in crisis mode. Nick's face turned pale as he read the report on his phone. "Noah," he whispered, disbelief washing over him. He immediately called Sharon, his voice shaking. "Sharon, you need to sit down," he said gently. Sharon, who was arranging flowers at Crimson Lights, froze as she heard the tremor in his voice. "Nick, what's going on?" she asked, her heart already sinking. When he told her, the phone slipped from her hands. The world around her blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That can't be true. Not my Noah." At the station, Audra sat in the cold, sterile interrogation room, her mind racing. Her attorney hadn't arrived yet, and Chance stood across from her, arms crossed. "You were seen arguing with Noah at the Grand Phoenix 2 nights ago," he said, sliding a photo across the table. "Several witnesses confirmed it got heated." Audra glanced at the photo, her eyes narrowing. "Yes, we argued," she admitted. "But that's hardly new. We've been arguing since we broke up. That doesn't make me a killer." Chance leaned forward slightly. "You also left shortly after Noah stormed out. Security footage shows you following him." Audra's stomach dropped. "I followed him to talk," she said defensively. "He was upset, and I wanted to make things right." Chance's expression hardened. "Then how do you explain the fact that his phone last pinged near the same area your car was parked that night?" Audra's breath caught. "Are you saying I killed him?" she demanded, her composure cracking. "You're twisting everything. I didn't touch Noah. I swear I didn't." Her voice wavered, but Chance didn't respond. He simply watched her, reading every flicker of emotion on her face. "You and Noah had a complicated relationship," he said slowly. "You hurt him before, manipulated him. Maybe this time things went too far." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. I cared about him, I still do." Her voice broke, and for the first time, the mask she always wore began to slip. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. "I didn't kill Noah. I couldn't." Meanwhile, Sharon arrived at the police station, demanding answers. Her eyes were red and swollen, her body trembling with grief. Nick was right behind her, trying to stay strong. "Chance, what's going on?" Sharon pleaded. "Why is Audra being arrested? And is it true Noah is?" Her voice cracked before she could finish. Chance nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry, Sharon. We found a body this morning that matches Noah's description. We're waiting on official identification, but it doesn't look good." Sharon broke down in Nick's arms, her sobs echoing through the corridor. Audra, hearing her from the interrogation room, closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Noah, what happened to you?" As the investigation deepened, new evidence began to surface. Forensics found traces of tire tracks near the riverbank that matched the model of Audra's car. The pressure on her intensified. When her lawyer, Michael Baldwin, finally arrived, he quickly assessed the situation. "Don't say another word without me present," he whispered firmly. He turned to Chance. "You're making a mistake. My client had nothing to do with Noah's death." But Chance wasn't convinced. "We'll see about that," he replied. "We're still waiting on lab results, but the evidence so far doesn't look good for her." Back at Newman Enterprises, Victoria and Victor were in damage control mode. Victor Newman, ever the patriarch, Wasn't convinced that Audra was the killer. That woman's ambitious, yes, but a murderer? I don't think so, he said in his deep, commanding voice. There's more to this than meets the eye. Victoria wasn't so sure. She's capable of manipulation, Dad. We both know that. And if she thought Noah could ruin her career or expose something, who knows what she'd do? Victor's eyes narrowed. Still, I want the truth. No assumptions.